I think we should just get started, chicas. I'm actually not surprised. I was talking to Janice earlier, and I think I mentioned this to you girls as well, is, it is so interesting that of the three webinars that we've had, right? This would be the one where maybe people would be a little bit more hesitant to attend because in your mind, like, does that mean that by signing up for something like this I'm admitting that I need help, right? Or that I need support, or that I'm looking for support? And that just kind of like speaks to that stigma around seeking support, needing support. Because even just like attending a webinar maybe could be like a little bit not intimidating, but maybe something that they're less likely to attend because of that perception that other people might have.
Mhm.
So this is interesting, but I'm really glad that, we're all here together. I feel like, Vetty, Jess, and I, yes, we are members and founders of RIDE, and we provide these services to help parents, with children who have developmental disabilities. And as we all know, that this has evolved into something so much more. We've been working with parents of, neurodiverse children, children who have no, like, are not on the spectrum or anything like that. And so we've also been working with Academia Montessori with the training for the teachers, which has been amazing. And I'm actually really excited about having this conversation with you ladies. I'm excited about having you, Janice. It has been so wonderful to have you participate in this webinar and these webinars. And this one in particular, I feel like it's really great to have a school perspective. And in Portia, thank you so much for joining us. Having a parent's perspective, right? Because Jess, Betty, and I, yes, we all are parents as well, but we're also RIDE. So I love that we were able to get the support, and someone was brave enough to participate and, just kind of be the voice of the parents, maybe the parents that weren't able to be here today, that are going to be watching us, from home afterwards. And so I am looking forward to having this conversation with you ladies. I definitely do think there is a huge stigma around support. We spoke about this in our last webinar when we were kind of teasing what the next one would be, in that you don't have to be the parent of a child who has developmental delays or developmental disabilities to need support. We all need support, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Parents of all children, people who are not parents. There's stuff that's going on in people's personal lives that, does not have anything to do with children at times. And I think in general, there is a stigma around seeking support and asking for help. Particularly for parents, I think a lot of times we feel like you're admitting that you're not a good parent if you are having to reach out for help. And I think that is so not the case. We can all talk about our personal experiences and how we have learned that along our individual journeys. But so with that, let's get started. So what I would like for us to do, if we could, is just kind of give a little bit of our background and our story, and we'll take it from there. So I'm gonna let Vetty start and tell us a little bit about herself and her journey.
Okay. Thank you, Susie. This is such an important workshop, I think, and I wish I would have had this early on in my journey. But in any case, so just to tell you a little bit about myself, I was born in Los Angeles, raised in San Diego, and I came back to my hometown. So I'm here now in San Diego. And I actually did not have my one and only son until I was 40 years old. So previous to that, I worked in education. So I've been in education for over almost 30 years now, which is scary because it ages me. But um, in working with, a lot of students, and I've worked with students at all pretty much now, I guess all levels, right? Because now we've been working with early education, but I've worked with K through 12 students and mainly in higher education. So I've worked with undergraduates and graduate students. Um, and I think, my journey as a mom to a son who's neurodivergent, so he was diagnosed with autism um, during the pandemic, sort of, because they weren't doing assessments. And so he actually wasn't officially diagnosed until he was 4. But the signs were there from very early on, probably around the age of near 2 years old. And so navigating that whole experience was super challenging, even though I have a doctorate in education, even though I've worked in education for so many years. I just found it really difficult to understand how to support my son and how to navigate all the different, things. And I think that's what's really made my involvement with RIDE really important and really dear to my heart because I'm sure there are so many parents out there who experience the same thing. And so I'm really hoping that through all of these workshops and things that we reach parents and that we share all this information and work together to really be there for our kids and give them the best support. Yeah, I
Beautiful.
pass it.
Thank you, Betty. Jess, do you mind?
Not at all. So, I'm Jessica, and let me see, I've been a clinician for about 15 years plus. I specialized for better part of my career in working with really young kids. I have specialty in 0 to 5 and all these amazing things. I was actually pregnant with my son when I was finishing up my postmaster certificate in ABA. And in my family, there were developmental delays, in terms of speech. So I had a hunch that, I might be looking for something. And when my son was born, I knew that he was too quiet.
Mm.
And, for as much as I speak about milestones and all this stuff, I'm like, he's not cooing enough, he's not babbling enough, he's not, and my husband's also in the field. So he's a school psychologist and also a therapist by training. And I'd love to say, oh my gosh, that made my life so much easier navigating systems and stuff like that. And maybe it prepared me for one part of it in some way, but emotionally, I think, and psychologically, it, I don't think anything prepares you, for that. And for me, I think when I noticed these things, and I think he was 12 months. So he started toe walking a little bit. And I was like, we need to get him assessed. And my husband's like, what are you talking about? And you're looking for things. Very observant kiddo. And, in speaking to the why parents sometimes don't ask for support, I think on one side for us, it was I don't want to admit that there might be something wrong, right? That my kid is going to have a harder life. And I think for my husband, that was kind of it. It wasn't, I don't want the services because of the stigma. It was, oh, shoot, it's going to be a lot harder, right? Not even for us, but like for him. And so we started all services and we had our little fights, and Susie's heard all about these kind of issues, and we'll relay that. But I'll say that I think because I think sometimes we don't really allow ourselves to kind of sit with just how difficult it is to just process the fact, right? That our kids have these challenges that other children may not have. And that, of course, it's not easy being a parent, not just because you may not know how to navigate systems and, right, like how to help, but just having to carry and hold the fact, right, that your child is going to experience some challenges that maybe somebody else isn't, is a hard pill to swallow. And hopefully, here we can learn that we don't have to carry that on our own, and that other people, prepared, not prepared, doesn't matter, right? That we're here to kind of support through that journey. And I think one of the beautiful things in terms of RIDE for me And I mean, I always get support from these ladies, right? Is aside from the planning and stuff that we do, is just being able to hear other voices and how our journeys might be so different but similar in ways, and just that somebody else can hold the experience of having, right, life be a little more challenging,
Mhm.
right? That can help. So that's me. And I have two
Absolutely.
that are
Too.
neurodivergent.
So
Yes.
my story is kind of interesting, actually. I have five. I don't know if you know this, Janice. You might know this. I don't know if Portia knows this, but I have five. My husband has three kids from a previous marriage, 18, 16, and 14. And then I have my two boys, 6 and 4. Um, Jaden, our 14-year-old, was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder probably around the age of 8, right around there, 7 or 8. Um, you know, that was a particularly challenging journey for me because I'm not his birth mom, I'm his stepmom. So it was a very, and I'm a person who's like very hands-on. So I noticed a lot of things, but I wasn't familiar. I wasn't familiar with, autism. I wasn't familiar of things to look for, but I noticed some stuff and I remember pointing them out to my husband, and I remember him, relaying it to mom. And I remember as early as, Jaden being 3 years old and me saying like, hey, like he's not really saying many words, or, are you guys concerned? Maybe you should ask. So I was kind of in that, I had to kind of take a back seat. And there was a point where it became really frustrating for me because I'm like, okay, now he's 5. He's not speaking at all. Like you guys need to do something. Eventually they did come around, and I think you make such a good point, Jessica, in what you said earlier, in that it's not necessarily that you want to admit that something is wrong, right? Because really, I want to speak very generally in this discussion today, because support is for everyone. But when we're speaking about particularly children who are on the spectrum or neurodivergent, or maybe there's like some other delays that need to be addressed, it's not that there's something wrong with them. There's just challenges, and their brain works differently. But these children are beautiful and brilliant in so many ways. And so thank you for pointing that out, because I do think that a lot of times maybe that is what holds, parents back. Just like having to really admit that, you're going to have to play life on hard mode,
Mhm.
right? That's really hard to kind of sit back and just like understand that this is what it's going to be. And there's days when I just sit here and I'm like, I wonder what it's going to be like for them when they're, out in the world in their 20s, in their 30s, like applying for jobs and trying to navigate, the world and socialize. And will they be prepared? And are we doing enough? And I think that as parents in general, two of my kids, Sammy is also on the spectrum, as you guys know. So, but I have, how many kids do I have? 5. I have 3 that are not on the spectrum. So I have like like the gamut of, I have teenagers, I have, just out of toddlerhood, and it doesn't get any easier. I mean, Janice, I'm sure you can speak to that. You have adult children. If you don't mind talking a little bit about, what your family dynamic is.
Sure. I have 4 children, two are adults, 32, 26. The other one, I guess he's already an adult, but just not of drinking age yet. He's 20, will be 21 soon. And then our youngest is 12. So I also have that wide range. And yesterday I made a comment, I can't remember who I made the comment to, in that our worries, our parents evolve over time and evolve as they age, right?
Mhm.
So we had a whole different set of concerns and worries when they were babies, and then when they became toddlers, and then when they went to elementary, and now it's a whole different drama for my 12-year-old. But then with my older children, now the concern is with their relationships, hoping that they have relationships with forever loves and, that their hearts will not be broken, but also worried about what their future families will look like. It's almost, and I'm not a meddler, at least I'd like to think that with my children's lives, but you as a parent, you worry and you worry about all of these things. I think my personal journey is not necessarily like within my own family, but I would say in terms of what I was exposed to as a child. And this is more like a revelation the past few days for me, in that I feel like my mindset right now is almost like rebelling against what I saw growing up,
Mm.
and trying sort of like the generational trauma that everyone is talking about, right? Like that, stopping that. It ends, I don't know if you've seen the movie, it ends with us, or read the book, but like it's almost that, like we have to end it here. We cannot let it continue. So growing up in the Philippines, it's the stigma is real. And to this day, the stigma is still real with my in-laws, with my mom, with just the older generation, in that if you ask for support, like what everyone said earlier, not only are you admitting that maybe there is something wrong, but also, like, you as a parent, are you also labeling your own child? Like, how dare you label your own child by asking for support when in fact you're just asking for support. So with our third son, given that he's already 3, so I had experience with the first 2, and the 2 were like talkers, like nonstop talking, even when they were a baby. My third one was not. He only made sounds, and it's all car sounds, like vroom, 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 vroom. And when eventually he started to talk, and when we asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, he wanted to be a race car. So everything involved cars. But when he was 1, because he wasn't talking yet, like, I did not hesitate. I did not wait. I immediately went to the doctor. I said, these are my observations. And the doctor said, don't compare. I said, I'm not comparing, but these are my observations. And I just want him assessed. Like, I just want him assessed. Like, I don't think that there's anything wrong with having him assessed. And at that time, the doctor said, yeah, your son was a talker in here with me too. He just chooses not to talk to you.
Wow.
At a year old, I was
Yeah.
already getting attitude from my third child. But at that time, I was definitely getting a lot of resistance from my mom, even from my own husband, who also felt like it's too soon. Like, why are you doing this now? I said, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying we just need to have him checked. But I think, why this is very important for me is because I'm hoping that by having more open conversations around support, that we hopefully can break and end, whatever stigma and myths and false perceptions have been passed down from generation to generation, for the benefit of our children now and the future families of our children.
You know,
Awesome.
I want to say something really quick, Jens, because I think it just resonated. So when I was in the process and I mentioned the toe walking, and I told my husband, I'm like, I think we need to have him. We need to have Santi assessed. And he's like, I think it's too soon. And I'm like, no. I'm like, there's this, there's that. And for a split second, I felt like he tried to talk me out of it. Mind you, again, we're both in the field, right? We know we'll work with kids. And then, I was like, I maybe I'm like, okay, well, I'll wait. And then I said, you know what? I'm like, no. I'm like, I don't need your permission. If I had a client come in that was a year old and didn't have 5 words, was toe walking, I'm like, I would immediately tell the parents, you really need to get right, like ask for an assessment through the regional center. I'm like, I am not gonna not do for my own kid what I would do for somebody else's child.
Mhm.
Right now, and saying that, right? Like, yeah, and sometimes it feels like, and I got, but from it's because you work with kids that have, and like, so you're looking for these things, and I'm like, yeah, Skippy, I'm looking to make sure that my kids are on. Like, why would I not do that if I do that to help other kids, because there's that flip side, like, oh, why are we labeling? But sometimes it's like, the sooner you get intervention, like the sooner the better prognosis. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. And so, yeah, I'm like, I look because I rather assess and say, like, it's no, right, everything's great, amazing, right? That doubt is gone and we can move on later on. My son wasn't like, he wasn't diagnosed until he was 4, right? And he went through the regional center and and so even then, but when saying that, right, there is this part where I'm like, am I, where I'm just like, no, what are we talking about? Why am I not going to do for my own kid what I would do for somebody else's? Simply because again, right, like that I don't want I don't want to realize or right that my child's life is going to be more challenging.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah, that
capacity.
makes sense. Portia, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Hi everybody, my name's Portia. I'll put my video on 1 second. Okay. Hi everybody, my name is Portia. I have one son. He is our only child. I was raised by a single mother. She has 3 daughters, so I have 2 sisters. We were born and raised here in California. I am a billing supervisor, for work. I've been working with the city of Los Angeles for about 5 years now. And I just got promoted at the start of the year to supervisor. Um,
Congrats.
thank you. So that has been interesting to do. I have had roles where I would be like the go-to for training and onboarding, but this is the first time with the actual title and position. Um, so yeah, so I've worked mostly my career in customer service in all different facets. I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in property management, and most recently, like I said, for the past 5 years with the city of Los Angeles.
Very
Oh,
nice. And I apologize. I have been mispronouncing your name this whole time, Portia.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry about that. But I just want to say thank you so much because today, you are the voice of our parents because your son also attends Academia Montessori. And so on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you for giving us your time. And we value whatever you want to contribute to today's conversation. And I'm sure and I hope that a lot of parents will see this later on and just like follow your lead and just say like, wow, that is like so cool that she was like willing to do this and participate. And I can't tell you how many people I believe like this is going to help. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
yes. So appreciative. Because there's one thing
Totally.
coming from our team. And even though, right, that shouldn't minimize our parent experience, but it does give a different, it's a very different thing. So yeah, thank you for being open and for coming on and and I know that we don't have other people here, but like Susie said, that just being present, I think will do somebody else a world of good.
Yeah, for
Thank you.
sure.
Susie has
So
been a tremendous help for us so far. So very appreciative of Susie and what Ride is doing. And thank you to Miss Janice for having it as a resource and tool for the school, keeping it. Um, when she asked me without hesitation, I told her yes, because she's been a blessing to Kobe and I's father as well. So appreciate all that she's done to help us in our journey so far.
You and just so you know, I I am like the head of the ship, right? So very often when I'm asked, questions by parents or I'm having certain conversations and I myself, I'm not feeling 100% confident in, the advice that I'm giving, which often happens, I'm human. These are the ladies that I defer to. So they know the people that were working well. And even though they haven't met you, and they haven't met your son, and they haven't met some of our other parents and some of our other kiddos, they are also very, very involved in any of the feedback that, is received directly from me is coming from this wonderful team that is with us today. So with that, Betty, if you could kind of lead us into our first main topic, which is why is support essential for parents?
Sure. It's interesting because listening to everybody's journey and story, um, I thought about what we often hear where it's, a lot of people say, oh, it takes a village, right? It takes a village to raise a child. And I find that it's interesting that we commonly say that, but yet there's the stigma behind asking for help, right? So we know it takes a village, but why is it that it's so difficult for us then to seek help, right? And I know for me, I remember when I first had Elijah. So I had him when I was 40, and at that point, I come from a Latino background, so all of my cousins had kids rather early, around their 20s, 30s, and their kids are grown, right? So Elijah was sort of the baby of the family, and we hadn't had a baby in many, many years. My parents are much older, so my mom was already sort of not really able to help, right? Or my dad. Um, and then I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and my siblings were down here in San Diego. My sister had just moved to Boston, literally 2 days before I gave birth. And I just felt so alone because everyone in my partner's family were also older because my partner's 10 years older than me, right? So um, I always told my partner, like we are like in a geriatric pregnancy, which is what the providers call it. I was like, but we literally are like everybody's older. We don't really have help. Um, and it was such a difficult time because I had to do it alone, right? And I always think of how I felt in those first couple of weeks before someone who was actually my sister from a distance said, Betty, no, like you need help, right? Because emotionally I was breaking down. I was not being the mother I could be to my child, right? And I was not enjoying that time either. And my partner was burned out. We were like sleep deprived, right? It was just really tough to keep up. And that's when I started, really feeling the tension that I had of asking for help. And I didn't really understand why, right? And what I didn't know at that time was that it was going to get even harder when Elijah was diagnosed. I think part of it is, well, let me go back. Why support is essential for parents. I think it's because one, everyone's journey, everyone's experience, like in listening to each one of your stories, we learn something different, right? Because everyone's circumstances are different and they have developed different ways of whether it's coping or dealing with something. So when we have support, even if it's just other parents we speak to, like what Susie was saying, we often text and just say, oh my gosh, I dealt with this today, and it was so challenging. And just hearing from like Susie and Jessica and saying, oh, it's going to be okay. Like this is, what you can do, or it's super helpful to have that community. for that kind of support. I think we all need that social connection. We benefit from that. I think also it's just managing those really difficult times, where we feel stuck. We really don't know like what directions. We may not be familiar with resources that are totally out there. I just went to a training earlier today here at my job, and we're all on the same campus, and they're like presenting all these resources, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been here for X number of years, and I had no idea we had this resource, right? So that's part of why it's so important too, is that when you connect, when you reach out for help, you learn the vast resources that are out there. And being part of RIDE, like now I'm really attuned to like what's on social media, what's on the news in terms of other organizations that do things that are very similar to RIDE, and what they're doing, right? And what resources are out there. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that existed, right? And so that's always really helpful. And I think for your emotional well-being, that support is key. And we're in an era of mental health, right? And the importance of mental health, and like what Miss Janice was talking about, really stopping the cycle of generational trauma. And this is a huge part of that, because I think, especially in communities that were more prevalent to generational trauma, a lot of it had to do with stress. A lot of it had to do with the stressors in our parents, grandparents' lives, that were passed down, right? Because they're trying to sort of manage and deal with things on their own, because they're dealing with their own stigmas that were at that time, and now we're sort of like we have the what do I call it? We inherited all of that sort of trauma, right? So we have to be very aware. But I think when we seek out the support, we become aware of those things, especially when you have professional services, right? So we have our peer support, we have family support, you have different types of support that you need as parents. And when we have those professional resources, whether it's a regional center, a school system, a RIDE, an organization like RIDE, that's where you really pick up on, or maybe you go to therapy, right? Where you really see the impacts on our emotional health and the importance of really trying to stay as healthy as possible so that we can be the best parent to our kids. Because the other reason it's really essential is because we are constantly models for our children. And I know my son pays total attention to how I handle things,
Oh, yeah.
even when like he's not necessarily around me, like in my proximity, but he's like in his room, right? But he can hear and he pays attention. And I see it because when he has a similar circumstance, he does exactly what I do, or he'll say the same exact thing I say.
I
And I'm
often
like, oh
say,
my
yeah, I often say they're teaching us just as much as we're teaching them. Like
gosh,
he
absolutely.
checks, especially Sammy, he checks me 24/7, not on purpose, but just like you said, when I notice how he reacts to something and I think about the last time I was in a similar situation and that's the way I reacted. And I'm like, no, that's not what I want to model for my son, right? And so I think in a lot of ways they are like mirrors
Yeah,
for us as well.
absolutely.
And I think you bring up a really good point when you said earlier that we inherit, these traumas and a lot of these things from our families and from our parents. I think also equally we inherit the way that we handle situations,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's the way that it was modeled. So I think that oftentimes a lot of that hesitation to reach out for help and support comes from that because, back in the day, our parents just kind of dealt with it.
Yeah.
And, they just like rolled with the punches and things were done a different way. I mean, it was acceptable to spank and to discipline children in a certain way that's not acceptable today. It was also expected that, what happens in the house stays in the house. I specifically speaking to, the Latino culture. Um, Janice and Portia, if you know want to chime in and kind of give your perspective on this. But I know for us, a lot of times it was like for me, I am the oldest of three children. And so, you know, in our families, oftentimes the oldest is like the second mom. And so, you know, when mom was out of the house, you're in charge of cooking, you're in charge of cleaning, you're in charge of the younger kids, you're doing this, you're doing that. And so as you grow up, you automatically assume that caretaker role in everything, in everything. And it's exhausting. And,
Mhm.
you know, I have had to learn how to give myself grace and give myself permission not to be that all the time for everyone, because there's days when you know, I just have like overwhelmed myself to the point where I'm like, you know, I'm there for everybody else. If somebody needs something, I'm there 24/7, whatever you need. And I'm like, who the heck is going to be there for me? If I'm not taking care of myself first, that's something that I struggle with even now, right? A little bit of vulnerability here on my part. Today,
Mhm.
it's something that I struggle very, very much with is, you know, I have to constantly remind myself, you have to put yourself first because you're no good for anybody else if you're not taking care of you. And
Mhm.
I do think that very oftentimes, because we, you know, we saw this so much growing up from our parents, from our grandparents, it's like it's a very heavy coat to take off,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, you know, I'm just like looking at these questions. The kind of support that's been most helpful for me is just to be around other parents, specifically other moms, not even moms of, you know, children with autism or anything like that, but just moms with kids in the same age bracket. You know, we had issues with our teenager who's now 18 years old, and that was like a whole thing. So just knowing that I can pick up the phone and text someone and know that they hear me, right? Not necessarily that they understand exactly what I'm going through, but that there's someone there that hears me and that sees me and that I can kind of you know, just vent a little bit to and say, you know what, it's going to be okay, has been everything. And Ride for me has been the most helpful, right? The question is, what has been the most helpful? Starting this organization for me was a way to pay it forward. I had the privilege of having a friend in Jessica who had already been through a similar scenario, right, with her children. And so when I started you know, navigating this journey with my son, I was like, oh my God, what do I do? And so I called her. And she was also the first person I called when I made the decision to start this organization. And I remember I cried, right? When I asked you, do you want to join me? Do you want to help me? Um, because my sole purpose in starting this organization was to pay it forward and to help other parents. And never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that it was going to evolve into what it has evolved into, because I have been texting with parents back and forth at all hours of the day, at all hours of the night. I love it. Half the time, we're not talking about things that are specific to, you know, whatever questions or things like that that they have. Sometimes parents are just checking in on me to see if I'm okay. Portia being one of them, right? I've seen her a couple of times in person. We've talked a couple of times, either via Zoom or over phone. And that has been such a blessing for me personally, is to just have that support and to be that support to other people, right? That also like gives me like strength and makes me feel like powerful. So yeah, that's kind of like my perspective on that. So for me, that has been life changing, life saving. Um, I love the fact that I can be that for other people. And oftentimes I find myself giving people advice. And after the fact, I'm like, That's advice that I should be taking. It's like I'm talking to myself, right? And so I go back and I reflect and I'm like, yes, you need to take that advice too.
Mhm. No, right now, just talking about that, I think to this day, and mind you, like before I became a clinician, I had to do therapy and, and I always have to do some kind of training, where I participate as well. And I think to this day, the most, I think, like impactful, like support that I received was actually on a call with Susie and Betty. I forgot to submit some paperwork so my son can go to this like Ocean Institute trip, and I missed the deadline. And it was like a hard, like mandatory deadline for something. And we had a meeting, and I wasn't even going to go on because like my eyes were so filled with like, I was like teary and I felt like horrible. Like, I know mom guilt, right? Or parent guilt is like a real thing. And I was like, oh my God, like, how could I have forgotten, right? Like that to do this, he's going to be devastated. And for whatever reason, I decided to like jump on, and they're like, well, what's going on? And I think I just started like, I'm like, I feel so horrible, and and how could I forget? They're like, well, you're balancing like a gajillion things, and it gave me like this permission to not expect, right, that I have to be like super mom or super anything. Because in every hat that I wear, right, I have this expectation, like I have to like not just like meet, right, like whatever the expect, I always have to like exceed, and something is gonna happen. It's gonna come at a cost. And unfortunately, in this particular situation, it came at the cost of me submitting this damn paper. And I couldn't bear the thought that it was like my son, but to have them like hear me and just lift me up, and I told them like I think I would have gone into a really dark kind of depressive place that I'm like I don't know that I would have been able to shake that guilt. I was able to get it fixed or whatever, but in that moment I felt just so helpless and like hopeless, and I just the amount of devastation, and it might seem like so like now thinking about it, like it's a trip, but like in that moment, it just felt like it was the world just kind of came down on me. And it was because I forgot to do this thing. And I'll never forget, right? Like feeling so just uplifted and like this renewed sense of like, no, I'm gonna get this done, and and figure something out, that had I not just had them like listen during one of our meetings,
We
and
dropped
have
it. We did. We're like, we're not going to go through the agenda. We're going to address this. We got you, girl. And I remember
yeah,
by the end of that conversation, I think we were all in tears. We were all sharing like how we felt as moms and how we felt like we have to be perfect and we have all these things that we need to do. And yeah, I mean, I think it was very cathartic for all of us. And I
Mhm.
think at the end of the day, we ended up thanking you for being so vulnerable and allowing us to share in that moment with you, because not only did it help you, but I think it was very helpful for all of us. Because oftentimes, like, even though and just, we meet on a weekly basis, just so you guys know, and then we communicate throughout the week. But we have one meeting that we meet on a weekly basis. We all have stuff going on, like a
Mhm.
trillion things going on. And, oftentimes we jump in on these meetings and we all have a smile on our face and, everything is okay. And like, it's like stuff's burning down in the background. It's like all kinds of stuff is going on, and that moment was just, I felt so privileged and so thankful that you trusted us enough to share that. Um, for me, that moment was, you and I have been friends for a really long time. Jessica and I went to college together. She went to middle school with my sister. We ended up finding out years down the line, but we've been friends for a very long time. And life, and we reconnected with Ride, and so we've now, been working together for a couple of years. But I just, for me, that was like a turning point, because again, I was like, yeah, if she can be that vulnerable, I can too. I don't have to be super mom.
Mhm.
So, um, when we were talking about this particular conversation that we were going to have, I was like, It's so ironic that we are going to be doing a webinar on support during a time when I am going through so much personal stuff, right? And now it's like, whereas before I would have jumped on, let's say, on one of our meetings and just not said anything. Last week I said, hey, you guys, my mom's having surgery. She's having a double mastectomy on Thursday. Please, can you just keep her in prayer? We know everything is going to be okay, but all the prayers in the world help. And I wouldn't have been able to do that a year or two ago. So, and for me, it's hard to be that open and vulnerable and just naked, right? Like I'm going through this and it's like, it's real. And to verbalize it and ask people not only for help, but when I'm saying, hey, pray, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. So that particular conversation with Jessica was, for me, it was huge. It was a big turning point in, the way that I want to approach my life situations in a way where it doesn't add to the stress and the pressure that I'm already dealing with. And just knowing that there are people out there who are willing to even just listen is everything. 100%.
No,
Yeah, I think that's, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jessica.
no, I was gonna say like I think and and there's a part of me that wishes like we would have had more parents as I think sometimes like in just even that moment. It was related to my kiddo, but not so much like, oh, something about his, like neurodivergence. It was like a mistake that I made as a parent and how horrible I felt. And that can happen to any parent. Like, your child can never have an issue or a problem, but it can happen to anybody. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who has felt that horrible about, right, missing a deadline or something, as a parent. And so, yeah, I think it's valuable in that we also know that we need that support as individuals and that we don't lose ourselves, right, in this like, oh, I'm a parent and that's I don't get wear any other hat, right, outside of a parent and work or whatever. And in that moment, I think that's exactly what I needed. I needed to be lifted. I needed to, like just kind of be literally like be scraped off the ground because I felt like, oh, the one time that and it was just like, oh, and of course there's been other times, but that was the one time that I remember, and probably was because I was able to like come out of that and not feel like, oh, I had to be perfect, and it was okay that I made a mistake because other people make mistakes.
Mhm.
No, and this is a good like transition to talk about stigmas, because a lot of what we're sharing that we are feeling when we have similar situations, right? A lot of the root cause of those reactions comes from these stigmas that we are always around. And I like how Miss Janice phrased it, false perception, because they're false. It's like they're not real, but we have been socialized to feel and believe that they are. And I think right now we're also in a climate where, as much as we're really open to mental health, right? A lot more open to mental health. We're also in a climate where we're being very mean, right? We're being very not tolerant of
Yes.
each other. And I think that that also feeds into the stigmas that we already feel, because especially, I mean, we're all women of color on this call, right? As women of color, I think this is something we battle with every single day. I know, going back to like what Miss Janice was sharing, and Susie, you brought this up too, but like in my household, I was raised with a mom who, I'm going to say, thought she was a superwoman because, you know, in reality, it's like she's just human, right? And but she took on so much, not because she really wanted to, it was to really prove, herself, to herself and to others. And would take on so much, would never ask for help, to the point that she was almost like a martyr, right? So I call that like martyrdom. And like me and my sister are always talking about how, oh my gosh, we don't want to be martyrs, right? We have to not be like my mom. As much as we admire my mom and love my mom, like, and Susie and I have had these conversations, because as much as I avoid it, I'm very much, I overextend myself, and then I think I need to take care of everything by myself.
Mhm.
Um, and I've been in spaces, right, where like where I feel like everyone's staring, right? I walk in a room, and because I'm different, or because my situation, like maybe because of my son, right? Or maybe I'm battling some kind of mental health something. I walk into spaces where I feel different. And because I'm feeling that, I oftentimes think that people are perceiving me a certain way when in reality they're not, Sometimes they have a complete opposite
Mhm.
perception.
Mhm.
And I'm reminded that when people will come up and say, like, oh my gosh, Betty, they'll say a compliment. And I'm like, I was so used to like saying, no, that's not true. Every time I got a compliment, I would be like, no, no. And I would have an explanation why that was false, right? And I had to learn to just say, thank you, that really means a lot. I appreciate that. And it takes, so I'm embarrassed to do that sometimes, right? But it's just from the cultural stigmas that I've been around,
Mhm.
that for whatever reason, I've been in spaces to made feel that I can't have, those kinds of successes, or have that kind of knowledge. And so we deal with different types of stigmas at different ages. Like I'm thinking for parents, like I think of like teen moms, right? Or teen parents, and how judgmental other people can be towards them, because we have this misconception that they were irresponsible, right? Or, oh, you had a child early, like you failed, or I don't know, like you
Mhm.
were promiscuous, or where in reality that's not true, right? And but we put that out there, and our teens who are parents then end up isolating
Mhm.
and not seeking the resources and help that they need to be incredible parents. Or maybe some of them, want to continue being in school, but then because they don't seek out the resources, they end up taking jobs and struggling, or, they leave their kids in spaces they don't want to leave their kids. And this is why this happens, because we make it difficult for people, or unwelcoming for people to seek help, right? And it happens with parents with children with disabilities, right? So I just feel like I'm constantly um making excuses, but I'm like, I'm not making excuses for my child. I'm advocating for my child, right? And but sometimes adults can make us feel like we're doing that. And I think a lot of the stigmas are a reason why we don't get out there and ask for help. And
Mhm.
and and dealing with Elijah, like my family, they say the funniest things. They'll say things like, well, he's so smart, so he's not really autistic. Um, or he doesn't look autistic, which I'm like, I didn't even know that it had a look, right? Like that's not even true.
Oh,
Um,
things.
yeah, exactly. And they'll say things like, well, I can't really tell. He acts normal, like, so I don't see why you're seeking all this support, and, you don't really need it. And so it does make me feel bad when I hear that, but I've learned to redirect that, right?
Yeah.
To educate my family and to explain why, and to teach them, no, well, actually, there's not a look to children with autism. It's actually sort of an invisible disability, like physically, right? It comes up differently for all kids. It's a spectrum. And so they've learned a lot more along the way. And yeah, they may still be judgmental in their own ways, but I just have to keep continuing to educate, my family on those things. So I think when you're part of certain communities, and even communities that are not of color, like they have stigmas too, within their own groups. And I think we just always deal with so many different types of judgment, stereotypes, um, and we
Ignorance.
believe all of these things. And so that's what really keeps us from being our best sometimes, right? And so it's a matter of really identifying and demystifying, and then telling ourselves, like, how am I going to stop this cycle? Because stigmas, like, it's similar to generational trauma, where you need to, you know, stop it from continuing in our communities. And a lot of it is education. A lot of it is
Mhm.
just really, really teaching our communities and the people that we're around. There's people who are highly educated who have the worst stigmas, right? And it could be a generational thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've been around all circles and it's so prevalent. So I don't know what you all have experienced in terms
I
of
just
stigma.
wanted to say real quick, speaking in like very general terms, right? We are in an age of gentle parenting and this completely different way of parenting. And they say that with each generation of parents, we become better parents, right? So our parents were better parents than their parents, and we're better parents than our parents, and so on and so forth. And the reason why that happens is because all this information and all these new things are being discovered throughout the years, right? Having said that, I think, and just generally speaking, there's a lot of stigma from previous generations in the way that parents now are raising their children, right? It's like, oh, you're too soft, or he's a crybaby because you don't discipline him enough and stuff like that. So I think a lot of times that is also a huge stigma, maybe that hinders certain people from reaching out, even to their like immediate family for help. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there because it's like, in very general terms, it's there, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I would say, especially in the African American community, um, I I don't have a lot of friends who are mothers, so like in my close friend group, I'm probably the only one who has a child, but I have my sister, um, her daughter, my niece, they're 3 months apart. So we get to be in this together. But in the African American community, especially for females, we are looked at as strong and we don't break. Like, so, um, that would be one of, I would say, the stigmas in asking for help, especially from older generations. I've heard so many times, well, I'm an old school mother and we did this and we did that. We didn't have this, but we still got it done. And you guys have all these resources and you still have all these issues. They'll do the air quotes mental health, and we didn't have all these things and we had less. So I have definitely heard that plenty of times throughout my journey as a mother. Because I am a mother of a boy, I do hear too, especially from the men in my family, when if he's crying or no crying, like don't or don't ask for your mom or no, like, shake it off and um things like that. So I would definitely um say those stigmas probably do stop people or from asking for help. I am like Susie, where I am a lot of things to a lot of people. I don't even like asking for help. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I ask, it's the last resort. I absolutely hate it. And if I have to ask, most of the time I'll cry because I don't like it. I like to do everything on my own. um,
So there's this question up on the screen that says, do you think there is a perception that seeking help means failure? Do you maybe at times feel like that is the perception if you're reaching out? Just I have felt that way. That's the reason why I put that on there, because it's almost like I'm admitting I'm not perfect. Or I'm admitting I couldn't do it on my own. And like, it's my ego,
Yeah, I would
really.
think so. Because one of the things that um comforted me most when I first started talking to you was um that it was not my fault, because I was thinking like, well, I'm a terrible mom. Like I'm thinking it's an extension of me.
Mhm.
So like when you would say it, it has nothing to do with you, um, I can already tell that you're a good mom just in the way you're going about things. And like just from my mom is my hero. So if I could be 20% of the mom she was, um, then I'll then I'll be okay. So when I hear her say like how great of parents we are to our son, me and his father, how attentive we are to him, that helps give me reassurance. Or if I see my sister, like, we talk a lot. Well, and then also now social media, even though it does have its negatives, it does have its positives as well. There's a lot of things to learn and people to follow to help in the journey too. So that has helped with reassurance. But like if I see other parents sharing their stories or see my niece acting a certain way, I'm like, okay, well, it's not just me.
I'm not
So
alone.
yeah, but I would definitely say the failure thing might have something to do with it. Some people may be embarrassed to share because, like I said, like especially in the American community, um, taking care of your mental health is not prevalent. It's more prevalent now. Um, I was also raised in church, so as a lot of other African American families, so we're taught to pray and go to church and seek Jesus, even though a lot of people don't understand that Jesus also gave us resources.
Yes.
uh, so
You can't pray it
that
away.
could
You got to
also
help them.
yeah, so that could also be a cultural context as well as in the African American community. You are seeing it more prevalent now in the younger generation. But like I said, I have seen a lot of people from the older generation give negativity to that, just saying like, oh, they're soft. The kids now are soft. They can't handle this. Well, when we were coming up, we did this. So there's still work to do, but there is a lot of people who are overcoming that. But I would definitely say that that has been my experience, and I believe that to be a lot of others as well.
Yeah. And so, that begs the question, what can we do to change this mindset?
So for Vetty, you mentioned something earlier, and I've been jotting down notes here about support. So this is probably taking us like two slides before, but I feel like they're all related.
More.
That like for me, and this is also what I tell my own children, but I also tell the teachers here, is that support or getting support and asking for support is an opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
Um, because we're not super moms. We don't know everything. We're not super teachers. We don't know everything. There's a limit to what we can do and to a limit to what we know. And by asking for support, you're allowing yourself to learn more, to learn from others, to learn from experts. And that statement is probably easier said than done because, yes, for a lot of people, there's still that, oh, but I'm a failure if you ask for help. But then I always also just remind, again, my family and the teachers here, that old saying, um, if you don't ask, then it's an immediate no.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do ask, the worst that you'll get is a no, but there's a chance that you can get yes. And it's the same thing. And I feel like support is the same way. If you don't ask for support, then you definitely will not get any. But if you ask, then there's a good chance that you may be led resources may open up. You may learn new things. You may understand new things. You may learn new things about yourself. But there is a better than zero chance that you'll get some sort of assistance, that you'll get sort of clarity to whatever issues that you're dealing with. And so for us, and I think Veri, you also said this earlier, from a school standpoint, I think what we can do, having these webinars, I feel is a great step forward, and it's something that I would love to continue to offer to our community. But also for us to just keep extending our hands out to our families and to our community, that we are here to support. We're here ready to take your hand when you're ready to take ours. But also, providing the tools and the resources to hopefully provide the education that, one of our families may need, access to our resource that they may need. RIDE has given us a lot of information, a lot of PDFs and links and things like that. And I also do my own research, and I'm, definitely more than happy to share that with our families who are, when they're ready to open up that PDF and read about it, when they're ready to watch the recordings that we've shared, but giving them the access to these resources if and when they're ready. One of the things that also, as far as like stigma is concerned, is, and I know that as you all have mentioned, like, it's starting to get better now, but we do still have a lot of work to do. This is even this whole notion of going to therapy, right? Or like the generations, if you tell them I'm going to therapy, and the immediate reaction is, what's wrong with you? And my daughter goes to therapy, my son goes to therapy, his girlfriend goes to therapy. And then when my mom found out about it, she's like, well, what's wrong with them? I said, there's nothing wrong with them. Therapy is to help them. It's a self-care. It's part of taking care of themselves. And I feel that way as well with like asking for support. If you ask for support, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or your child. Just trying to learn more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that's the perfect segue into our next question. I'd like to direct this question to Jessica and get her perspective as a therapist, an LMFT, is how can professional support help parents, and when do you think, or what scenarios do you think are when should parents seek professional help, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, and I think honestly, I think situations like this is ideal in terms of like where professionals can kind of be more in um in a position to like, oh, if you have questions, right? Like, here, come ask. And but I think anytime, honestly, and like if you have a doubt, if you have a concern, like, is this typical? Like, is this problematic? Any of like those moments, I think should be reason enough to like check in with a doctor or a professional or something, because at best, right, they're going to say, oh no, this is totally typical, right? We don't want to pathologize everything. um you know but and also at best, if there is something that needs attention, like you'll also get information, right, from an expert, from somebody who like, right, like studied this stuff. And I think sometimes is hoping, right, that like I you was surprised how many times I have parents that would come to me. And I mean, I have like amazing rapport with a lot of my clients, where they'll seek me out even after I've left like children's. And on occasion they're like, I heard so and so, like, and sometimes the so and so can be somebody at a bus stop. Right. And they said that like medication, like I shouldn't consider that, or that therapy is this, or that ABA is not good, and I'm like, okay, I'm like, well, I'm sure that so and so is very well meaning or very well intentioned. I'm like, but so and so can only give you the perspective from like their experience, right? Which could be very different from what's going on with your child. And this is where asking somebody who actually, right, studied and did all of that to kind of learn all the different ways in which, right, something can present itself. So that we're not just kind of going through this very narrow lens of, okay, this is the only way to support, let's say, somebody who's like ADHD, or this is the only way to support somebody who is on the spectrum, right? Like that's kind of the thing that experts or professionals can provide is perspective, right? It's a varied responses and this multitude of different scenarios that can like help, which is not like this cookie cutter kind of like approach. And so that's why I told her, like, feel free to ask. And even about those anecdotal kinds of situations, right? Like, is this true? Like, what do you think? I think it's worth it, right? And so, I mean, this is why, I mean, we get insurance and this is why we have access to these resources. Like, why not? Like, why rely on one person's experience, even in your own family? Like, I have two kids that are on the spectrum
Mhm.
night and day, from like, yeah, and it's, and for me, I was just like, is it not, and sometimes, like it presents, very differently in girls, and I have a girl, and, you know, and what did I do? I'm like, okay, you know what? Instead of questioning, even though I know, like, I'm going to go and I'm going to like have an assessment and like rule it out. Why not? Right? Why second guess? That's huge. And then like in this kind of arena, right? There's so much value to like parent support groups and like, just mental health groups. Um, One of the other things that I do is I provide like parent trainings for another agency that does stuff like specifically for regional center, like parents and like consumers. And I mean, this is like a massive group, but I think one of the things that getting peer support is that reduction of that loneliness and the isolation that a parent can experience, because you can have a wealth of knowledge. And like, for example, for me in our group, right, Susie, I think at least initially I was, like one of the few that had a kid that I knew had, was neurodivergent.
Mhm.
And my child wasn't speaking. And in my group of friends who like all had kids around the same age, he was the only one. And it was such an isolating experience, even though I was like, oh, great, all my friends have kids around the same age. It was very different for me.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until like, Susie with like Sammy, and so there's all these different, right, experiences that you might have that sometimes hearing it from other people, right, that are kind of, again, navigating similar situations is a huge benefit, because there is a loneliness that happens in the presence of other people, right? Because
Mm.
it's not just about like the not being understood, but like your experience, like you don't even know if you're heard, because
Mhm.
you're just so different that sometimes you don't even, yeah, you don't even like voice, you don't say anything, because it's just like, what for? People don't get it, right? Like,
They're not having the same experience that you
mhm.
are, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly, right. And it's like, and or in an effort to kind of support you and lift you, it's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's nothing. It's gonna be right. And even in that, like their efforts to reassure you when you already know, right? Oh, I have a potential diagnosis. Like I've already been told by professionals, right, that I need to seek support. Sometimes that can be so minimizing, right? And like just not validating of your experience when somebody says, "Oh, it's gonna be fine. Like, don't worry about it." Like you're just thinking it's like, well, no, I'm sure it will be, but not in the way that you're saying it is. And so being surrounded by people, right? Not just the professionals, but other people that can share in that experience, even not if it's a 100% kind of like similar situation,
Mhm.
can help feel, right? Lift some of that isolation. So that is like really, really important. And there's schools asking teachers, asking doctors, nurses, all these other people, like having, if you have a friend, right? I think just being able to like ask until you find somebody. But usually, right, when we're talking
Reach
about where
out
do
to
people,
ride.
yes, talk to ride, and eventually you'll
Mhm.
get to ride. Um, I was lucky enough that, I was kind of thrown into things, when I worked at Children's. But really, my experience when I became a clinician was here, Jessica, on my first day, go to this meeting that you've never even heard of before, like with Department of Mental Health, right? No, DCFS, right? The Department of Children and Family Services, and explain this. And I literally like had to like learn just by like Googling and researching, right? Even though I was an employee at pretty, well-renowned place. Um, and so that was one of the things that I did, right? And then like fact check and so, but being able to sometimes you unlock one thing and it's like it opens up, right, a slew of resources for you. And sometimes it's that if you can't contact or like access somebody, but usually your first line should be the doctors, should be your teachers. And because if they don't know, they might be able to connect you with some other professional that might know, right? Or like, oh, I got this handout. Or they might be able to connect you with like a ride or somebody that might give you a little bit more guidance, because their circles get smaller and smaller, and I think that's the thing that sometimes like, well, they're not specialized in this. It's like they don't have to be, but
Mhm.
right, they'll know somebody who might know somebody who then, you know what I mean? And that's kind of how it goes, even for us. And so I think there's so much power in getting like peer support. Um, Making sure that you trust the professionals that you're working with, I think is like really huge. And I always tell people, get a second opinion. If something's not like jiving or, I'm like, I don't get offended. Like I would do that for my kid. And I would expect any parent to go out and question, like, please, and I think a professional that is truly there to help you and work with your family, um, is not going to have any issue or qualm with you asking questions. They're going to expect it.
Mhm.
I do. And I'm like, challenge me, question me, like I want you to want the best for your kids.
Mhm.
And
Touched on something really key for me with this topic. And as professionals, as educators, as peer support to our friends or family, the importance of not dismissing and listening, and also not making assumptions,
Mhm.
because I think that's where we can be really proactive, right? To prevent people from one, not getting help, um, but really be proactive in making sure they're getting like the education, like they're becoming more knowledgeable. And we are too while we're listening, right? Because I know just from listening to all of you here, it's like, oh, like I make these connections and it informs how I deal with things in my own life, right? Um, but I think we have to remember that when we are in a role of support, um, that we have to really be active listeners and learn how to really validate people's struggles
Mhm.
and not come from a judgmental standpoint, right? Um, so that we can slowly start sort of like dismissing these stigmas and things.
I think
Because
that's
that,
really key to breaking
right?
down um, these walls that people,
Yeah.
myself included, that people build, right? When you realize that there's someone who's actually hearing and seeing
Mm-hmm.
and validating what you're
Mm-hmm.
going through. And this is something that I like, I make an active effort, especially when I'm speaking with, my parents from Ride, but like even with my friends, is to just make it a point to like validate that
Mm-hmm.
experience and point out that a lot of times these things are out of your control. You're
Yeah.
not bad or you're not any worse, or this has absolutely no bearing on who you are as a person at all. And I
Yeah.
hear you and I see you. And what can we do? Like, how can we get through this?
Mm-hmm. Like someone mentioned earlier, um, I feel like I'm failing as a parent, right? And I remember saying that to actually one of my PhD students.
Mhm.
And they said something that completely flipped it for me. And they're like, no, the fact that you feel like you're failing as a parent means that you're an amazing mom,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
a failing parent wouldn't feel that. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. Um, and so just having support like that that can help you, redirect those negative thoughts and that negative feeling towards yourself as a parent, just makes a world of a difference. Mhm.
I
No,
was
it,
just add, sorry.
no, no, go ahead.
And I know that you, in the previous slide, Susie, you kind of jokingly said, reach out to ride. But that's true though. I feel like, I think in your previous slide, the questions were like,
Go
how
back.
do we, how, how can professional support help parents with, I feel like this is a great role that you guys have, and as a resource for us, for the school, and for our community, because it's almost like positioning you as you're that baby step, you're that not too intimidating step,
Mhm.
asking for support, especially for families who are reluctant or who still have that stigma, who just don't know what to do, um, and or are worried that it might prompt questions from people like, are you labeling your child, or things like that. But I feel like, again, offering your expertise and offering your services, your support, in your group as like an advocacy group, right? Like it's almost saying, well, we have these people right here who just be there to listen to you, and who can just be there to answer questions that you may have. Um, they're not necessarily your pediatrician who will label your child or something, or the actual people who will assess you from the regional center, but they can open up all these resources for you. And so I feel like, as one of the things that we can do and we can do together is to just remind the families that we have in our community that you guys are here, and that you are sort of like that, a baby step of to support. I mean, it's baby step maybe for them, but once they start talking to you guys, just like what Ms. Bravo said earlier, it will be an eye opener for them in terms of how much support you ladies can provide. And so
Mhm.
I was just thinking about that. I'm like, hmm, that's
Thank you
good.
for that. And I think the beauty about us is that first and foremost, like we're parents. We're
Yeah.
moms. We're just like you guys. We've been through it. We're going through it. Vetty, you made this comment earlier in reference to, at one point saying that you felt like you were failing as a parent. I just made that statement last
Mhm.
week, a week and a
Mhm.
half ago, and I was going through this situation. You guys are all aware. I was going through the situation where my son was, his inter-district transfer permit was revoked from a school district where we were at because we wanted him to attend a dual language immersion program. And, now my dream of him being in a DLI program is gone. And it was just like such a big, big deal for me because he he looked at me and he was like, "Mommy, are you gonna fix this? Are you gonna make this better?" And I was like, "Papi, I'm gonna fight for you. I'm gonna do everything I can." And I remember sending you guys a message. I'm gonna try not to cry, but I remember sending you guys a message. And in that moment when I had to like come down to eye level and explain to him that I I couldn't, that I did everything that I could possibly do, but unfortunately, we were going to have to change schools, and I apologized to him because I felt like I was totally disappointing him in that moment. It was like the most heartbreaking thing I've ever had to do. And when he saw, I think he saw like how much it hurt my heart to have to say to him that I couldn't fix it for him. Just like his reaction and just him saying to me, going from please fix it, no, no, this can't be, to like just looking at me and being like, it's okay, mommy. I know you did everything you could. I understand. Oh my gosh. It was like everything. But yeah, in that moment, I felt like a total failure because, this is who we're supposed to be for our kids, right? Superwoman. And sometimes we can't, and that's okay. And here we are 2 weeks later, and he's at a new school, and it's not dual language immersion, but he has adjusted so well. And I put all that pressure on myself. I was so disappointed and so upset with myself, with everybody else involved with the situation. And in that moment, the support that I got from my peers, not only the ladies in Ride, I mean, where she was when I mentioned to her what was going on, she was checking on me. She sent me messages. There were other parents at the school that I had, disclosed what was going on to. I had my family. Like, those 2 weeks were so stressful and so difficult. I remember Jessica in a text message, I believe she said, "You have a village. It's going to be okay."
Mhm.
And I believed her. And for me personally, and for Ride, that's what I want to be for anybody that we touch and anybody that we interact with. So I hope that comes through, because that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Just to
I
piggyback.
think that you guys do. It was just like how Miss Janice was stating that you guys are like the baby step, because I, as a new parent, I didn't know anything or what I should be looking for. I'd never even heard of the regional center prior to speaking with you. And so now we've had the opportunity to learn different resources to help support our son and um, try to make things better and efficient for him. So you guys have definitely been that for our family. And like I've said before, we are very appreciative and blessed to have you guys as a resource, because everybody doesn't have that, like, as an option. So
Mhm.
if we didn't have this, I don't know where I would turn to, or I mean, I guess you'd have to Google, but luckily we can just turn to you, and you give us what we can start on right away.
That makes
So
me feel so good. That's what we're here for. I'm so glad to hear you say that, and I hope that we can continue to be that for you and for, whoever else needs that support, even if it's, just to text me. I feel like my parents don't understand what I'm going through with my kid today, or, my sister got upset because my daughter was climbing and bouncing off like, believe it or not, I've gotten these messages, and it's like, hey, like, that sucks. I hear you, you know? Um, and just it makes my heart so full. It makes me so happy to know that we're affecting at least one family, one child out there, and our hope is that there will be many, many more. So I cannot believe, you guys, it's already 7:33. So we've kind of we've kind of exhausted our time. I do have a slide here where I kind of, just included a couple of the questions that we had in the previous slides, and just put them with one or two additional questions, just for people to marinate over when they watch this. And just thank you guys so much for just participating in this conversation. Just a few key takeaways. We want to remind everyone, seeking help is a sign of strength. It is not a sign of weakness, right?
Right.
Let's take that with us and remind ourselves. It's something that I have to do on a daily basis. Breaking the stigma around asking for help is vital for supportive communities. And just remember that professional and peer support both play important roles in helping parents thrive. So I think there's a very fine balance, and both are equally important. Any parting words from anyone?
Not parting words from me, but more of a, so our monthly newsletter, Susie, you're familiar with it, Ms. Bravo. Hopefully you've seen it. So we've been trying to expand it for maybe about 2 or 3 months now. And we've been like dedicating a section there for RIDE. So we have in the past, we've been putting some information about the upcoming webinars. And then now that this is the last of this series, for the next upcoming newsletters, what I've suggested to the ladies is I'm hoping to get like tidbits from the webinars that we've had and then put it there in our newsletter. And like the key takeaways that you had there was like perfect. So if that's something that I can borrow, and then maybe, you know, expand on it a little bit more based on the conversation that we had today, and like, and just have that like as an additional reminder for our parents, you know, when they go through the newsletter, that there's that additional, like, hopefully handy resource for them that they can read.
Absolutely. As per usual, I'll make sure that we get you a recording of this conversation. And initially, what we were going to do is we were just going to have title slides with the different, topics to guide our conversation. And then as I thought about it, I was like, you know what? We always give them a copy of the presentation. So why not include some of the questions that maybe would be really helpful for people to think about as they're going through this video and as they're thinking about all of these things. So I'll provide you with a PDF copy of the presentation as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, so much. Portia, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so happy you were able to join us. I think your perspective as a parent was absolutely essential to this conversation, and I'm so thankful for you tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for what you are doing and continue to doing. And you guys are making a difference, like I said, from my family, and I'm sure it'll be for many others. So I appreciate all the hard work that you guys are doing. Miss Janice, thank you for having this as an option for parents. And just thank you guys all. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, ladies.
Just really quickly, for Portia. We are a baby step, but we're also a group of lionesses. So if you ever need somebody to go for you, just know.
That's your girl right there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, so much. We'll see you soon. Portia, good luck with everything. Keep me posted.
Thank you. I will.
All righty. Have a good one.